Hi, everybody. I expect people will be joining us as they get free from other meetings, but we're going to go ahead and start now. Um, as usual, I'll be recording so that we have a record of this for our team members. I will also be putting this up on YouTube, and I've actually figured out how, which is nice, so hopefully soon. Anyways, well, I don't see anybody new at the moment. We're going to be talking about some work that Rick has been doing, some analysis. So I suppose, Rick, are you going to have something you want to show?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then you can go ahead and take the talking stick.
Share my screen. Okay. Am I sharing?
Yes.
Is it visible? You can all see? Oh my goodness. Well done. Let's go ahead and dive in. So it's a new year. We're we've done our 6-month report on the project, and we're diving into the second 6 months. And this is where all the exciting stuff happens in the sense that we culminate in going into Phoenix and Houston VAs with the software. So with the software we've been developing. And there is a significant amount of work left to be done before we can do that. And we are shifting our approach in a few different ways in order to make sure that that happens on time. So let's take a step back. Our key priority, we're going to have several tracks to this work. The first and essential priority is to make sure that we get the existing forms working with Vista. As George has been showing, he's built a middleware infrastructure that makes it possible for those forms to talk to Vista, and the data actually ends up stored in a graph store inside the Vista system, just like we want. But there are still some fields that are not doing what we want them to do. And so we're going to be focusing on getting the rest of those done so that we have complete communication between the forms and the Vista side as our primary track. And then off of that, the things that we've demoed in the past about various kinds of improvements in the look and feel of the forms are things that we can begin exploring, attaching to them once we really are sure we understand them, because once we have them completely working. So we start with our top-level analysis, and this is the suite of forms that we received from Ardit on the 2nd, was it? I think it was January 2nd. We did a top-level analysis to look at the names and the prefixes and get some idea of some samples of the variables that are used and different ways the forms referred to, and then also some sense of scale so that we can figure out, where's the meat of the project, which are the parts that are going to take the most work. And you can see from the percentage chart, which is based on characters rather than lines, to give some sense of sheer volume, that the intervention and treatment form is a doozy. A CT evaluation form, of course, background form, and then biopsy, mediastinoscopy, those are the top 4. And we're going to start by focusing on the screening section of this. That is intake, background, follow-up, the things that happen when you first see a patient before any treatment actually begins, and along with the home form and the case review form, and see if we can get those working together as a suite. Alexis is looking at the intake form, digging through the JavaScript. I'm digging through the background form, and I'm going to do a walkthrough of that today. And I'm going to have lots of questions, and I'll be taking notes because I'll be eliciting some commentary and from Ardit and some from George and possibly others as well. And then in parallel with that, Dom is doing an analysis across the forms that we'll be looking forward to getting into. But basically what's going to happen here is that each of these forms is going to need a champion who digs into the form and masters it so that they know all the variables, all the inputs, all the widgets that are involved, all the JavaScript functions, how they all connect to each other, how it connects to other forms, and so on. Because in order to make invasive changes, including not making invasive changes, in order to just get a system like this working with a second system, the middleware that George has, requires really knowing it like the back of your hand. You know, this whole kind of standing back and hoping we can figure it out by scanning and so forth that many software projects do is just not going to fly here. So as a step into that, I've dug into the background form. I'm using a manual approach. People can use an automated approach so long as they follow it with a manual approach. Sooner or later, you have to actually put your fingers on the code and put your eyes on the code, every last comma, every last variable, every last scrap. It's exactly like learning how a city works. You can look at a map of a city, and that's nice, but until you actually get on the ground and walk around and look and see, you know, who lives where and where you can get the food and where you can get the clothes and how you transport yourself around, it doesn't count as real knowledge. It's just abstract knowledge of the kind that Hegel rightly scoffed at as dangerous, makes us feel powerful, but doesn't actually let us do anything. So with an eye towards that, the other thing I want to talk about here is that I'm a disciple of Donald Knuth's Literate Programming book. Anyone who has not picked up Don Knuth's Literate Programming, you should probably do that. I mean, it's right up there with the Mythical Man Month on things that are very much worth reading. And he talks about the problem of large software projects generating enormous volumes that people then lose mastery over because there's just too much of it. They can't remember it all. As they learn the new stuff, there's so much that they forget the old stuff. And so in order to deal with that, one of the things that he says in Literate Programming is, you know, the problem of enormous masses of text is not new to computer science. People have been dealing with that for thousands of years. It's called books. People have invented, for thousands of years, people have invented technology to allow us to master books. There are all kinds of tricks, like headings, tables of contents, indexes. I mean, just all kinds of stuff that has been come up with over the past thousands of years. In Literate Programming, he says if you want to master a big body of code, you should apply the very same tools that we use to master books to your big bodies of code. Now, if I were to go look at this before I touched it, let's take a look at, I think, is this the George version? Yeah, this is the George version. This is what George loaded into the Git repository, which is what Ardit sent us on the 2nd. And this, if you load this into a word processor at 9 points on 12, so that it's readable, they're not all jammed together, which is a very conservative size, you end up with 100 pages of text. Now that's assuming 18-point margin, so it's a really full page, 100 pages of text. Now, if someone handed you a book that had 100 pages of text, and it was difficult text, right? This is not casual reading, and it had no index or tables of contents, you would think that was, you know, ridiculous. How are you supposed to understand it? But that's the situation HTML usually leaves us in. You know, in theory, you can add comments, but in practice, the comments, you know, you pay for the comments when you're loading, and most people don't bother with much in the way of comments in HTML. So one of the things that we could do to try to get a handle on this code is to, which I have almost finished, I'm nearly done with, is to go through and organize the whole thing, insert headings, create tables of contents, create indexes, and basically move from having a document that's a wall of text to a document that's hyperlinked and navigable, you know, instantly navigable, to be able to hop from place to place, to be able to locate all the places where a variable is used, all the places where a file is called, and so forth, so that if we change our minds about when something should be called, if we change our minds about where something should be stored, if there's any change we want to make, or if there is a bug in a particular section involving a certain widget, we don't scramble around doing random searches, trying to find that widget and hoping it's only, you know, that the name is only used in one place. Do we actually have hyperlinks and contents and index and all those things that can drive us right to the location? So here's the original text. Before I began digging into this, I talked to Ken. And one of the things that Ken suggested is to install a toolkit that includes HTML tidy. HTML tidy follows the standard rule. It's a Unix command line tool. You can send HTML into it, and it'll produce HTML to come out the other side in another file. And it will go through and do two things. One is it will search for errors and fix them. So for example, if you happen to have a table somewhere in your document that is missing the opening table tag and just starts right into rows and cells, which this one did, it'll find that and it'll insert the table comment where it needs to go. It'll also standardize the indenting so that you can tell how deep you are and what's inside of what and what's not by just scanning the document. So I ran HTML tidy on this. HTML tidy is not perfect. It has a huge number of flags. It's hugely customizable, and I haven't learned it very well yet. I just did a basic level assessment. Now, if you look at first here, it doesn't seem like it's made much of a change. But if we scroll down a little bit, let's get out of the functions and into the HTML. Let's see, which document am I looking at here? This is George's. Right, so now we're down into the HTML. I'm going to scroll up to where the HTML starts here, which would be, here we go. Functions, 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 functions. Here's the last function. This is the big one. There. Now we're into the HTML, right? This is where the header begins. So if we do the same thing, let's see, where are we? We're about there. Do the same thing here. This is the output from HTML tidy. First, you're not seeing much, but when you finish the functions, what you're going to see is we start to get indentation. You see that? This is before, this is after, so that you can see what's inside what. Also, I used a flag that said consistently use lowercase for tags. So it's not sometimes uppercase, sometimes lowercase with no particular rhyme and reason, which is typical of code kind of that's been maintained for a tremendous amount of time. Different people take different approaches. Same person might take different approaches on different days, and you end up with something in which you get a problem with the signal-to-noise ratio because you get these variations that don't mean anything. So I've converted it all to lowercase. If we scroll down a little further here, again, the use of indentation in order to find our way through the document. So HTML tidy just did that sort of level cleanup, and it also found us a place where a table tag needed to be inserted. It's sort of a rudimentary level of cleanup, but it gives us a start to having something that in which the structure of the hypertext is visible consistently to make it easier to find our way around. So I did that initially, and eventually I'll be doing this with all of them. It just takes like a minute. It takes seconds to run. Once you've got it installed, it just takes seconds, and it gives you a starting place. So I took that starting place, and then obviously people have their own favorite tools. It doesn't really matter too much what the tools is. What matters is the result, and the result has to be to create a document in a form that you are able to get through every line of it and every comma and every quote and get to where you know how it's laid out. So what I've done in the last few days, I dumped that into NeoOffice, because I get control over formatting in NeoOffice. I put this in a Consolis is a standard Microsoft Windows monospaced font designed for programming. So it makes the kind of distinctions that we want between characters so that we don't mix them up with each other. Like here's a 0 down here, right, to be distinguished from an O. These are basic, these are little things, but if I'm trying to learn something, it helps if I don't screw up because I misread an O as a 0 and things like that. So I've got the formatting in place here. I take the output from HTML tidy. This is very similar to what they had. And then I just go through the lines one by one, and I shift them around consistently so that it's organized the way that I want it to be. And then I start marking it up. One of the ways I mark it up is identify which groups of fields that appear on the screen. Which of the things in the HTML are visible on the screen and which are not? You know, if we go to the background form here, right? And where am I? I'm in occupational exposure. That's the section up here, right? So HTML is very wordy. Most of the HTML doesn't appear on the screen. Most of it's talking about what will appear on the screen or how it should behave. But one of the first things we need to be able to do, this is the same in roll and scroll as it is in a GUI, as it is in HTML. It doesn't much matter, but you get the same fundamental problem that when the code you're looking at its primary job is to produce and allow you to manipulate something that people see that produces a visual artifact like a form like this. One of the most basic tools that you need in order to do troubleshooting is to be able to get from the spot on the form that you see that has a problem to the equivalent spot in the code. So if I see that there's a problem with this yes/no, right? Say I'm running some tests. It says, to your knowledge, you've been exposed to asbestos. Well, it would help if the words, to your knowledge, have you been exposed to asbestos, were searchable. And of course, with hypertext, that's not always the case because it might be modulating between bold and not bold, like a lot of these lines do. So there might be, this meta language text, the B might be inserted in the middle here, right? To your knowledge might have not been bold, and if this had been to your knowledge plain text followed by have you been exposed to asbestos in bold, then this bracket B bracket would have been here. And if I'd done a search for to your knowledge you've been exposed to asbestos, I couldn't have found it. It wouldn't have matched. And it's a little thing, right? But when you're troubleshooting, you're trying to hold an increasing number of things in your head at the same time. What's the variable? What form am I on? What's the behavior? Blah, blah, blah. You've only got 7 plus or minus 2 registers in your brain for simultaneous parallel thinking. And you kind of want to remove obstacles to that. So one of the things I did in the markup is I made it absolutely obvious the things that appear on the screen, those lines show up in a different color. They're just, you could scan this without any kind of help whatsoever, and you can still see, oh, look, it's a yes and a no. Well, those are the yes and the no that show up here on the screen. So I did a little bit of markup, but the point wasn't to do the markup. The point was that I manually went through these lines and learned where the yes and no are that go with have you been exposed to asbestos. Likewise, marking up function calls so that when I look at a function like JSHP, I can see where it's called from. I can see what the connection is between the two. If we wanted to make a change to JSHP, for example, it would have a potential effect on every place within this document that calls JSHP. So I have to be able to say, what's every place within this document that calls JSHP? People say, well, you can run tools on that. Yes, but if you're running the tools dynamically, it means that you don't know. You haven't actually gone through the document. You don't have the knowledge in your head. You're hoping that the tools will compensate for your lack of knowledge. And that works to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent. Then a big problem is how much of the HTML is active and how much of the HTML is not active. And this document contains, out of the 100 pages, it contains somewhere between 20 and 30 pages of inactive HTML. So here's some examples. And one of the things that I'll need to figure out as part of mastering this is, do we want to keep carrying this HTML with us, this older HTML? Is it still of use? Is this, for example, an older version that we aren't doing anymore and it was kept here for historical reasons so people would know the history of the document? Or is this a prelude to something that's going to come that somebody's in the middle of developing but it wasn't ready to turn on yet, and that's why it was commented out? Well, you can't tell that from this. It doesn't say. But if we identify these things and we see what they're about, then we can have a conversation like we're going to have today where we say, so what is this first exposure? Is this an old thing or a new thing? Should I keep this and develop it further so that it turns on, or should I eliminate it, and allow Git and the version control system to remember the older version that had it in it? These are questions that we can ask and conversations we can have only once we actually look at the document and find that this stuff is in here. And if we want to have a discussion about things like that, we have to know all of the places that have commented out code, because there might be multiple versions of something. Something might show up in here 2 or 3 different times. Smoking history, there might be an active version. There might be 2 different inactive versions. In fact, that's a good example of one where there is. And the only way that I would know that is because I actually went through the document and studied it in detail. I didn't just stay at arm's length from the document, try not to immerse myself in it, and try to use tools to find my way around. I've actually gone through this. Now, I'm not completely done with this markup, but you can see that part of what we've done here is we've taken, like Don Knuth recommends, we've taken the tricks and tips out of how you organize books. We've put in first level headers like here. We've put in second level headers like here. Third level headers. The whole point is as much organization as it requires in order to be able to make this kind of hyperlinked PDF thing off here. So if I go to the PDF that I generated from this, I can immediately go to JSHP and see kind of what's going on with it. And if I want to know all the places that where JSHP is called, I can jump to my index down here, and I have there's JSHP. Here's all of the pages on which JSHP appears, which tells me something about where the hypertext is. An index, right? An index to the thing that shows me the variable, shows me the function, shows me the files that are called, shows the forms that are called, that is organized in a way that's intuitive to me personally. This is one of the things. When you're doing this kind of work in preparation for troubleshooting and refactoring, it's all well and good to use industry standard approaches, but a lot of times when we say industry standard, we mean convention. Right? And the difference between a standard and convention is important. Standard is something that's deeply problematic if you don't follow it. A convention is something that a lot of people do, and it might be helpful if you did it. But you could break a convention more readily than you can break a standard. And when it comes to the purpose of walking through a document the way that we've done here, the purpose isn't to make it so that it looks like everybody else's document. The purpose is to make this in a form such that I, as the person who am mastering the background form, who am catching up with Ardit's work and catching up with all the other people who worked on this before, that I'm comfortable finding my way around, that it speaks to me, that it uses my idioms, that it's a mnemonic, a prosthetic for me to extend my memory and extend my ability to think about the document. So it doesn't matter so much whether this document is useful to everybody else, right? We've got the HTML text for that. That's what everybody's running. This document has to be useful to me to make me fast and effective at this document. And by creating this thing, I'm now in a position where I know what functions are in it. I know how often they're called and where they're not called. I know which of these functions are not called by anybody. And I know, especially most importantly, I found a lot of this commented out stuff so that we can have a conversation today. So if George says, I'm having a problem with this particular variable, it doesn't come through. When I adjust, if George says, I go to tobacco use and I fill in this value here and it causes an error and I don't know why because the value looks like the right value, I can find that in the document and I can find the functions that it calls and I could be effective in troubleshooting with them. And so that's the point of this is I've made myself, this is scaffolding. And I'm not interested in kind of what tools are out there that would automatically generate this, because if they automatically generate it, then I don't know it. It means that I didn't go through the document and my brain is empty. I just have this kind of artifact that's useless. The point of this was to go through and change my brain and get myself caught up. So Ardit, I appreciate the huge amount of work that you've done. My goodness, this is a big document. There's just a lot going on in here. And of course, as we saw back over here, this is only 17.24% of the total work that you're responsible for. So, it helps me to more fully appreciate the volume of the work that you've done to go through this. I'm not entirely done with this. You can see there's some functions like calc-npy and calc-age. Check-age, I haven't gone through these in the detail that I have through the others. In a day or two, it'll all be done. And it's the same with the sections. Some of these sections, like I was showing you, occupational exposure. I did go through occupational exposure. It is basically fully indexed and organized and linked now. I know everything that's in it and why it's there. And the internal hidden variables that are associated with each section, they now show up on the table of contents. I can see the sequencing. That's all there. Other sections I haven't done that with yet. Tobacco use is a good example. It's an important one and it's big. It's got a lot of goodies in it. Same is true for medical conditions. It's another section that I haven't gone through yet in any detail, but give me a day and this will be done too. And there's a couple of, I've done all but a few of the commented out sections. I haven't done the old Medicare eligibility. I haven't done the old version of Your Health in General, but I've done all the other commented out sections to find out what are the variables that were in there. And in a lot of cases, this helps me to see kind of what the intent was, what the developers were thinking about, or in some cases, it helps me to see that for some current version, like secondhand smoke exposure to the household, there is an older version of it in smoking history here, which was, I think, an earlier approach, an earlier version of it, with some of the questions the same and some of the questions different. So I'm starting to see the logic, the internal logic and structure of the document, and it puts me in a position to be able to engage in a conversation like we're about to engage in, and to be more supportive of the actual development that's going on. So that brings me to the dialogue that I want to have. So Ardit, how long have you been? Can I ask you, how long have you been working on this suite of forms? I mean, when did I gather that there was a developer before you? And that you took over at some point. Can you give me some sense of kind of how long ago that was that you took over?
Sure. So I started working on this late 2013.
Okay.
So you're right that there have been several developers that have worked on it. We actually have 2 developers, including myself here, and the other person that has been working, that's here working on it, has been working on it since, I want to say, 2005.
Okay, and which developer is that? Who's that?
So that's Daniel Max.
That's right. Okay. And then There was an earlier developer, was it Matt Reeves?
Anthony Reeves.
Anthony Reeves. Do you know roughly when he was working on it?
So he actually came up with the initial design of the system. So he, I mean, considering the system started in about 2000, I guess he's been working on it since then. He maintains a separate branch of the system, actually, and I think it diverged, I want to say, in the 2007 time frame.
Okay. Gotcha.
Archit, there's been, we did some work on improving the front end and putting in a MariaDB backend too, right?
Yes, we did do that, yeah.
And you have somebody there who's come in on a contractual basis and helped out with the HTML form, HTML display, right?
We did, yes.
So there's other people. I just wanted to point out.
That's good to know. Yeah, it's one of the things that I find really helpful when getting into the kind of deeper stage of being able to really work with a body of code. It helps to know who's been working on it and when, and kind of what they were working and what their thoughts were. So the work on the front end and putting in a MariaDB backend, when was that?
So that was pretty recent. I want to say 2016.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. And the contractor who worked on the HTML display?
I guess about that time. Though I mean, she worked on a few other things with us. So I guess I'm not entirely sure what time frame she worked on the forms.
Okay. But you know, semi-recently it sounds like, in the last 5 years somewhere.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Okay. And then, so to your knowledge, if we're just talking about the background form for now, does this contain any commented out HTML that is a work in progress prototype that your intention is to turn it on and it's not quite there yet? In other words, is any of the commented out HTML future oriented?
No, so all of that is old versions of the form, essentially.
Okay.
Part of the reason why there's so many pieces commented out is that for the very beginning of the form, well, maybe for the first 12 or 13 years the system was in existence, there wasn't any real source code control that was used.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, instead of deleting things from the document, people tended to just comment things out.
That makes sense. Yeah, the VA follows a similar approach. They distinguish between primary development and secondary development, and the primary developer can do anything to the body of code that they're working on because they have it all in their head, so they know where they're going. But if anybody else makes a change, including if you get called in to do primary development on something that they don't give you time to master, they just like get this functionality out the door, and you're like, well, I hope this works, and so, you know, I'll make this change, but I want to preserve the old one just in case. That's called secondary development. Both of those are, and in those cases, they follow exactly what you're doing here, where it's like preserve the old, and make sure you can always get back to it, and you know, you try something new, and if it works, then you keep going forward. So, are you doing source code control now at Mount Sinai?
We are. I think sometimes old habits die hard, and we tend to still do some of that.
Sure.
Where we'll comment out the code, but we're trying to kind of fix that going forward.
Okay.
But we since I joined helping you guys in, I think it was 2016 or maybe even a little earlier than that, you had a Git repository, right?
Yes.
So revision control has been there. Maybe not all elements have been under revision control, but
Right. Okay. Good.
it's not a very recent thing.
Sure.
Right. We've been using it for a couple of years. It's just, yeah, there's
2013.
some workflow issues, I guess, that still remain.
Sure. Okay. So when it comes to getting to the point where George's middleware is able to get all of the fields working with Vista on this form, just taking this as a prototype for the rest, part of what I have to do is get to the point where I understand the code well enough to be able to make changes without causing side effects consistently and rapidly. So that's part of why I've been building what I've been building here. So there are two things. As part of that process, we have to kind of be able to change things when we have a hypothesis about what the change will do, and then make the change and then try it out and see if we're correct or not. And that process teaches us things about it that any amount of reading, including marking up like I'm doing here, can't teach us. It's praxis, right? We learn by doing. Same with medicine. So I'm strongly driven to alter this form internally in order to understand it. But by the same token, I want us to stay in sync. And I don't want to create problems either for George or for you. So my first focus is to look for changes that have zero effect on the functionality, but change the way that it's internally organized. Because that gives me a playground in which to modify things and see if I'm right about how it's structured and what sits within what and so forth. So I have two initial candidates for kinds of changes that, three, that I'd like to make. The first one is, if it's true that all the commented out code is historical code and you've got it in version control, and now we have it in version control, then I should be able to make a version of this in which I cut out all the old code. And what the result would be is, first of all, I'd find out if it's true, that I've successfully identified it all, because if it's not, I will have broken it. The second is I will have shrunk the document. And since it's at 100 pages now, I'm highly motivated to want to reduce its size while preserving its functionality, because that will speed up load time, and that'll also give me less stuff that I have to keep in my head, which is good when you're talking about 100 pages. That's a lot of material to memorize. It puts me in mind of those people who memorize the Quran, every single word of it, and that's considered an amazing achievement. And this is just one of a whole slew of documents that I got to get in my head. So if I can shrink it by removing things that are not currently functional, or that we don't plan to make functional in the future, then I'll free up more room for the functional stuff in this and other forms. So if I do that, it shouldn't break anything in theory. And then we can run that version side by side with your version and test the things through and see, did anything alter? So that's my first proposal for making an alteration in this, other than just the outlining spacing that I showed you on the other document. The second proposal I have is something that Rick Avila pitched as an idea, which I thought was very interesting. And that is, if we look at the functions at the beginning of this document, Dom and Rick have been hypothesizing that what we're going to find is a mix of functions, some of which are very specific to this form and have to be here, and there's nothing like it on any other form. There's nothing identical to it on any other form. But there might also be some functions that are general purpose functions that have been copied into all the forms, because all the forms need to be able to do that thing. We're just hypothesizing right now, and we're about to do that study. I'm at the point now where I know what's in this one, and so while I can move on to a second form, Alexis can be working on the intake form, Dom might be working on the CT evaluation and/or others, and we can compare our lists of functions and see, are any of them the same on all these forms? And if they are, then conceivably we could move them out of this form into a JavaScript library and have these forms all refer to it. So then there's only one copy of the function, and that'll help with version control as well for that category of function if it exists. because then, when they're inserted into forms by copying, you get the danger that one of them will get updated, another one won't. And when I say danger, having dealt with Vista code, I can say it's a certainty because sometimes we're in a hurry and sometimes we're not. And when we're in a hurry, we say, well, I have to fix this and get it out now, and I'll come back and fix the others tomorrow. And I don't know about you, but I go to bed and I wake up in the morning and everything's gone, unless I wrote it down. So we're hypothesizing there might be stuff like that in here. And the only way to find out is to compare these forms and look. But if there is,
it's more than a hypothesis. I mean, I've done some analysis, and I can tell you that there's redundancy here. So the question is how much.
Right.
That's where we're at.
Right. Right. So by doing that, that would give us another way to shrink, for example, this form by moving out of it any JavaScript that it has in common with other forms into a library and just having this one refer to it.
It's interesting. That's a question for Arjun. I think that if we are finding redundancies in the forms that these templates, this format of these forms, that doesn't mean that there's redundancy in Arjun's system. Because remember, these forms that we're looking at are constructed in real time by the FormGen. It very well may be that, in fact, on his system, they're in separate files and they're pulled in by FormGen when you put the form up. So we're basically reverse engineering that FormGen and saying, okay, let's take, we could use, instead of using a FormGen, we could use JavaScript libraries instead for that functionality.
So I can say that the majority of the HTML, including the JavaScript, is actually not inserted by that script that that FormGen script.
Right.
The only thing the FormGen script inserts is HTML related to the header and the footer.
Okay, so on your system, if we find that these things are redundant between forms, there is JavaScript redundant between forms, that will also be true in your system.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That's very good to know. Good clarification. Thank you. So redundant JavaScript between the forms, between our copy of the forms, will also be in our system. Good. Okay. So in theory, then we could, and this isn't something I do overnight, right? None of these things are things I'm just going to lurch into. That's why we're having this conversation. Is I've kind of put together a bunch of ideas, and I want to try them out on you. So one of the ideas would be, well, once we've compared 2 or 3 of these forms and found some of these things in common, we would then propose to create a separate JavaScript library, move the common things out, make sure there's only one version of them, and then have these guys call them. And that should also shrink these forms a little bit, so that there's less redundancy and also so that there's less to keep in our head. So that's the second thing I'm pitching as a possible way to shrink the forms and alter the forms without changing their functionality at all. My current generation of goals is preserve the functionality exactly, but master the contents and through manipulation. And then the third idea would be these headers that I have, you see I've kind of created a structure, an outline structure like a book. And these headers could be inserted as comments in the HTML itself. They don't take up much space, certainly not compared to the amount of commented out HTML we'd be removing. And they would make it easier for me to generate something like this in the future even if we did a radical alteration. They'd create some kind of a trail of breadcrumbs through the document that says you're now in this section, so that people could find their way around without. So people who hadn't done the work that you've done and that now I've done in this form of finding everything in here could find things more rapidly, come up to speed more rapidly. The goal would be to get to where programmers could become proficient safely faster by having these kind of little headings inserted. Of course, with the comment start and end before and after them. So those are kind of the 3 things I'm thinking about doing to this form. that I hope that if I do it correctly, the end result would, and this should only take, you know, like a day or two. The end result would be a form that's smaller inside of the HTML, but that looks exactly the same when you run it and behaves exactly the same. So would you have any objection to that, Ardit?
No, that sounds good to me.
Okay. And if we do that and we test it and it looks like it's the same, should we send you a copy of the results?
Sure. Yeah, that would be that would be helpful, and then I can incorporate that into our system.
Okay, very cool. So that was one of the things I wanted to talk about today, is kind of look through kind of where the structure's at and talk about what we would do next. Another thing that we want to talk about here is, let's see. I'll have to find. Go ahead.
Rick, before the end of the hour, I have a separate question I got that I'd love to review. It might take 10 minutes or so.
Oh, well, we've got 20 minutes left now. This is a reasonable point for me to pause and kind of have you take over, because I have some questions for you too, but why don't we do your thing first, and then I can pitch my question to you after.
Okay, great.
You want to share your screen?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing. You take over.
All right, let's see here. Okay, since others are looking at those entry forms, I decided to take a little bit of a look at the biopsy form. And I discovered some very puzzling things. And that's why I'd like to talk about it.
Yeah, please.
So here, this is the copy of VX form that's on Avicenna, and with everything running. And you'll notice it's kind of short. It's not supposed to be short. If you look inside, there's just a lot. It's huge. It's not, but it's short. You know, so the question is, why is it short? What's broken? So I said, I don't remember it being broken. This is the copy, the last copy you gave us. Here is the, anyway, I'll go right to the question. It turns out that on VenDev 2, which is my other development system, I had the first copy of the form that you had given us was still in the HTML cache. So I went over there and I said, I thought I remember it working better. And take a look.
Ah.
It's big. All right. I think and I don't know that it's entirely there, but it's pretty big. It's big. In addition, the new one, if I come over here and I do submit form, it says I need to, I have to say whether a biopsy, whether any one of these three things were done. Well, I thought I did. Here, look at this. No, yes. Supposedly, if you do this, you should get past this, but you don't. You don't get past this. So it's short, and the JavaScript error things aren't running. And this is on the new form. So then I go over to the old form, and I got if I do submit form. Oh, let's do this. Let's reload it. Right, there's reloaded, and it's still long. It's big. And now if I submit form, I get the same error. You got to say which of these three things are running. Let's say there was one of these. Now I suppress submit form, and now it asks me about the version of that.
Yeah.
This is on the first copy that we got of this form, and then if I go over here, I mean, I have gotten it. Actually, I've been able to, you know, select things like this. Now, this is the way that this is supposed to appear and work, isn't it? I mean, I've never seen this form filled out, but I mean, basically, you're supposed to see all the options at once and fill them out like this. Is this the way this form is supposed to appear?
So there is actually a function that we put in for, let's call it, not debugging, but basically there's a function called expand dropdowns. That's not supposed to be called in production, but I guess it's called here. And what that does is it expands the dropdown so that when we print out the form to give to somebody for review, they can see all the options in the dropdown boxes. But that, I guess, the call is left in.
Right. So that's why. I mean, because I have never seen drop-down boxes like this before. So I was trying to figure out how did you do that? So anyway, some interesting. So I tried to go and see. Okay, this form, which is the old form, looks better and works better than the new form, right? So so I try to say what's different. Down here, this is down at line 3000 and 3800, right? This is where those drop downs are, and this is the one that's working. And they've got this peculiar way. You start an option on one line, you end it on the next line, and then you start a new one, and then you end that one on the next line. So you see that you always have to. They have this ending and starting thing. And I guess that's so you can just put the values at the end of the line, I guess. Makes it easier to do that. But anyway, this is the formulation in the one that works. Here is the same place in the one that doesn't work. And it's missing all of the slash options. So you start this option, but you never end it. And you start this option, you never end it. And I think that's why none of these drop-down boxes are displaying. So the question is, what might you have done when you saved it the second time that would have these things malformed?
So, am I muted? No. Okay. So I think that the first form I think was probably the output when when you go and you save the page in the browser.
Right.
So I think it puts in those ending options because the original doesn't have them.
Oh.
So I think that explains why they're there, and I guess it also explains why they're formatted kind of weird.
Yeah, they are kind of weird. I was going to say I don't know any programmers who would do this. Right?
Yeah.
So these were automatically inserted by the save as function of the browser. Okay, that makes sense.
And as for why it's not displaying, I believe it's because there's something executing that. I'm just taking a quick look at it now. There's, for example, if you look at the top section where there's the referring physician.
Yep. Which doesn't display at all.
Right. If you look at the code, basically on load, when the page loads, there's a JavaScript that toggles the visibility of those fields.
So.
Yeah. So if you look, I think the function is called doInit. You want to just do a search for that.
Okay.
Also, wouldn't it consider that those are errors? I mean, if you were to go into and look at it, the errors and such, when you load that, if you were to use the programmer's desktop, basically.
I was so hoping that what you said was true, Joel. So I came over here and put on the console, and I try it, and I get nothing except this comment about ASCII, and that's all I get in the console. I was hoping to get a bunch of errors saying, "Oh, you can't."
Yeah, but no. I mean, once it's opened one of those pieces up as the option, and then without closing it, it considers all the rest of them to be nested in it, and so it's not considering the HTML code itself to be the code because it's nested inside of those things.
Oh, so you're saying that this error is blocking me from seeing the other errors?
Yeah, well, no,
Right.
that was just saying that, you didn't specify the character encoding inside the HTML part itself. But beyond that, yeah, the where you would expect to see those things happening. I don't know why it's not showing the errors, but yeah, once you've got them nested after the first one without it closing, it's considering everything else to be part of it.
Right.
That were nested within it.
Right. Right. Right.
Detoggle XX. Yeah.
So, so for example, if you switch back to the browser console where you can type in some JavaScript,
Okay.
yes, at the bottom there, if you type in do in it, it'll actually do the opposite toggle, and then parentheses because you're calling a function.
Does that work?
So do init and then open close parenthesis, and then.
Oh, look at that!
That just
Now they're appearing.
visibility.
Now they're appearing, and so I wonder. Oh, and look at this! Oh,
Yeah.
you're a genius! What a genius! My God! Here we are.
Right. So they're hidden by a JavaScript call that runs when the page loads. And the original thought there was that for most things, they wouldn't actually need to fill in all of that detail, and we would just provide buttons that would expand sections for them.
Well, for example, if you said node here, you wouldn't want to have all this stuff.
Right. And then, so that was the original idea, but then I think we had kind of gone over it and said, well, we actually never need those sections. So that's why we never put in the button to toggle or the functionality to toggle the visibility back on. And as for the error checking, I think it's probably one of those things where the error checking didn't match the change in the form. So it's expecting some of those fields that are hidden to be filled out, but since they're not because they're hidden, it won't let you submit.
So in the current forms that they're using in Phoenix, will they have all these these drop downs?
They will not, unless they change their minds.
Oh.
So the thing we're seeing, with this latest version, with this abbreviated form, is the way it's supposed to be. This is the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
Except it's supposed to work. It's supposed to,
right. It's just the error checking needs to be
right.
Modified to account for the fields that aren't showing anymore.
Okay. So is this a work in progress? Did you just make these things invisible recently, and so that you're still updating, getting the error checking working, and all that sort of thing?
Yes. Well, I guess I should, in interest of full disclosure, I thought I had addressed the error checking, but I guess not. Because when I send you the forms, I tested them all before sending them, and they seem to work. But I might have been looking at a patient where there was already data in those fields.
I see. Yeah.
So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I got it. Okay, great. So you have really set my mind to rest here. I thought we had another major, problem in things missing in the forms and things. But your explanation's great. That these things are artifacts of the old saving, are not needed for it to function, and that you've actually designed a function that turns off and on that section. That's great.
So effectively, it's very cleverly commented out code. The code's not commented out, but you've come up with a function to make it disappear off the form.
Well, yeah, exactly. And if you think about the CSS tricks that Ken did on the
the graying out.
Yeah, the graying out and then turning them on. I mean, it's the same kind of functionality to be, try to simplify the form for the user unless they need the more complex, the greater complexity.
Right.
Thank you. I love these calls. We get so much done. That's fantastic. Thank you. So I'm not gonna propose we go back to the original forms that you said.
Right.
We're gonna move from the ones that we have. That's good. That's all I had for now. Rick, you can finish up.
Well, my next step was to turn to you, George, and say, so now that I've gotten myself and my copy of the background form to the point where I feel confident making initial changes and doing troubleshooting with it, do you have a list of things that you've been doing with the background form where there are fields that aren't yet being saved into Vista that you want to be saved? Where would you like to point me now that I can be helpful with that form?
Well, I think you should make us a second form, a SAMI form for that.
Okay.
You know, and you know, and we, because honestly, we don't have a form of any kind that we know 100% works. Yeah, either for the JavaScript perspective or even the save and restore perspective. Although I'm pretty sure with the background form that we are doing a save and restore for the graph correctly, because we've tested that quite a bit.
Okay.
So if I had a side by side, if I had a background SAMI,
yeah,
and we'll give it, you know, SB form SAMI or something, and as a name and so both of them will be current in the system. You just call up one or call up the other, and we could probably even have it so they go against the same graph.
Yeah, that's right.
And so and then we could go between them and then perfect the art of seeing whether or not you broke anything. I think that's the next.
Right.
The next thing is what, you know, how do we define well working? How do we define that the form is working, and then and how then you continue redo that, whatever that definition, whatever that testing is on your changed form, so you know that what changes you made didn't break it. I think that's where we got to go next. So
okay.
Just make a new one for us and do all the stuff you said.
Okay, that's what I'll do. And then my next question is for Ardit. I sent you an email asking about this. You could see we've sort of been able to, you helpfully changed the names of the HTML files so that we would know which ones are which, but it meant we didn't actually know what the original names of the HTML files were. So part of the reason I jumped into the analysis I did was I wanted to look and see what properties inside the HTML might tell us what the original names of the forms were. And by and large, that worked for the main forms, but I was left with these 5 where it didn't. And I guessed that the home form is actually home.html originally. Oh, I'm not sharing. I should share. Let me share. I'm a sharing kind of guy.
Yeah, did you see that email that I sent to Ardit as response his response to your email?
No, I'm behind.
You're behind. Oh well, you need to read that, because what I did is I reviewed what I just mentioned earlier today. The forms that we're being given, the HTML that he's giving us, do not exist in that form at all in his system. It's generated by the form gen. It's a runtime entity. In other words, at runtime, form gen puts together the header with the submit, with the submit buttons, plus the inside of the form, plus the footer and all that stuff, and then presents the form. And he saved for us, because that's what we need. He saved for us that composite thing. So that composite thing is what we're naming. And so one of the pieces of that composite thing is what you're saying, siform.html. There's probably an siform.html in his system, but it's not the same as ours.
It sounded like what he was
The
just saying.
same as only a piece of ours. It's the same as only a piece of ours.
It sounded like he was just saying a moment ago that the only part that's different is the header and the footer that puts the button bar menus on top. Is that right, Ardit?
Right. So in other words, like if we take the background form, so we have a file called sbform.html, and it's almost identical to the file that I sent you, with the exception of the header and the footer and the buttons and that. I mean, I can.
Okay, great.
I can probably. I mean, if it would clarify things, I can send you a copy of the SB form. The one that we use in our system.
Sure. So when your system is actually running and the user is actually filling in the background form, is that sbform.html, or does that have yet another name because it's composite?
Right. So what the user sees in their address bar is basically a CGI script.
Okay. 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 That makes sense. I understand now. So the question I was about to ask becomes moot. Yay. Okay. Yeah, maybe just send us a copy of sbform.html, the raw one itself, and we can sort of infer the differences on the others as well, just after we compare it to the one we've got. Because I'm assuming you're saying it's the same kind of change it will have done to each one, sticking the button bars on the top and bottom.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just having one will be a good example then. And that wraps up our hour. Gosh, thank you. This has been tremendously helpful.
Wait, hold on. There's a couple of bookkeeping things. One is that, George, thank you so much for the emails regarding the reminders. We need to probably talk at some time a little bit about what the goal right now is, which is, I'll just state very briefly, to create a very simple reminder with numeric values. And it sounds like Patrick Reddington.
No, Brian Volt, who is the main reminder creator, the lead guy in the VA for creating national reminders, created a reminder which gives a numeric, gives you packs per day, and it gives you pack years in the reminder. And I sent you a copy of that reminder that can be loaded in the system.
But it's stored in Vista as a numeric value,
yes.
or?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll catch up with that, and then I'll reach out back to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so it's been done. I think if I understand what it is you want to do, it's been done, and I sent you a copy of it.
Okay. All right. Awesome. And then the other thing is, where are we with the Git? I'm sorry. Yeah, the Git repository. Are we any closer than we were last week in terms of having that private repository available in the public?
No, because on last week's call, when I said what I was going to do, I got pushed back, and I was told we should do it a different way, and I don't know how to do it the other way. I'm not trained at Git at that level. So I can't actually take the lead on setting up branches, moving everything into the public repository and creating a development branch. I don't know how to do that. So it went from being something I could do to being something I can't do. So someone else is going to have to do that and teach us all how to do branches.
Does anybody, do we have a
probably Ken or Alexis, but neither of them were able to be on the call today, I'm guessing.
All right. We can catch up on this later. I just want to make sure we keep moving. That's all.
Sure.
I'm glad you checked. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Anything else, Rick? Either Rick?
I'm good.
Okay. Anything else from anybody else? Great. Thank you, guys. This was a great meeting, and we will see you next week. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.